What event in your life still fucks with you to this day? Story 1. Asking my parents to take me to the hospital and being dismissed by them. A few years ago, I ended falling suddenly and aggressively ill with what I now know was sepsis. I thought I just had a cold, but it wasn't going away. I was more afraid with each passing day, and decided to go to urgent care. The labs the techs took from me alarmed them significantly, and they urged me to go to the hospital, so whatever I had was pretty severe. I was terrified, exhausted, and nearly delirious, but couldn't drive myself to the hospital. I asked my parents to take me, and they immediately became dismissive. I was blowing things out of proportion, and they decided I should wait until the next day to see my doctor. My dad told me I could drive myself to the hospital, but he wouldn't support me doing it. I spent that night just crying and staring at the ceiling. I knew I was dying, but my parents chose to dismiss my fear and concerns. I prayed to God to let me live through the night and asked why my parents could do something like this and still sleep at night like nothing was wrong. I wanted the pain to end, and I had to beg them to take me to the doctor the next day. At the appointment, the nurse yelled at my mom for ignoring what urgent care said the day before and for waiting to take me somewhere to be seen. I will forever be thankful to that nurse. The doctor made his diagnosis and basically said I was 1-2 days away from death and I needed to be hospitalized ASAP. This kicked off a nearly 1-month hospital stay that required me to get open heart surgery because the damage had been done. While in the hospital, I asked them why they didn't believe me, why they neglected serious health issues time and time again. This wasn't the first time they dismissed something serious, whether it be weight or broken bones. They didn't have an answer for me. I guess me nearly dying in the hospital finally made them realize their mistakes. I know they're traumatized from the ordeal and have tried making it up to me. Sometimes I'm okay and I can talk to them like nothing has changed, but I will never trust them again and I don't think I can forgive them. Sometimes the disdain and hatred I had for them while they let me suffer comes up, and I can't stand to even look at them. I've since moved out, and they noticed I don't come by to see them very frequently. I have PTSD from that night, wondering if I would die while they waited to take me to the hospital, and on those days, I can't see them. I hope I can recover from that one day. Story 2. I went cuddling with a man on our second date. On the ride home, after an awesome day exploring the mountain, he lost control of the quad and we went off the logging road into the trees. A tree fell on my leg, pinning me down. My date, who took a tree to his skull, fell backwards onto me. I was unable to move my entire body, trapped under a man I believed to be deceased. We were hidden in the trees off of a low-traffic logging road and my cell phone was far out of reach. I remember watching the clouds pass overhead, thinking I would die out there, a slow, painful death. It was terrifying. I screamed for the guy to wake up. He eventually gained consciousness long enough to pass me his phone. I called 911, attempted to stop his bleeding, used some adrenaline super strength to move the tree off of my leg, and crawled out to the road. We both spent weeks in hospital. My leg was severely broken and I was hypothermic. He broke his neck, arm, leg, multiple skull fractures, and brain bleeds, yet survived. This happened 2 years ago. It feels like it was just yesterday. Story 3. Was a normal Friday. I had taken an early day to help my father with haylage. Earlier that morning, my father brought my mother to the hospital because she was dry heaving a lot. When I got home, the home phone rang and I picked it up. They said it was the hospital and that they were going to transfer her to a bigger hospital because she had just had a heart attack. So I tell my father and he goes to the bigger hospital to fill out forms and stuff. 3 hours later, I get a call saying that they are going to airlift her to the city with the best cardiac doctors. So I started to pack bags for everyone. Then my father calls me one more time to tell me to go get my brother from his pre-prom party because moms are not going to make it. So I'm driving like a bat out of hell trying to find my brother's party. Then, speed all the way to the hospital praying that the cops have a huge drug bust or something. I get to the hospital with my brother and we see our father outside the room crying. My father is an emotional man when it comes to death. I have never seen him cry so much. I look to my right and there's 7 people in my mother's room. Doctors, nurse, the helicopter crew that was going to transfer her. It was about 45 minutes it felt like, and they said there was nothing else they could do. My mother died that day without a warning. Story 4. When I was a child, I received an invitation to a birthday party. It was handwritten and given to me by the kid whose birthday it was. When I got there, he pretended not to remember inviting me and asked to see the invitation. He denied writing it in front of many of my classmates and said I invited myself. I was so upset that I wanted to leave immediately, but my mom had already left. So I explained what happened to his mom so she could maybe drop me off. Luckily, his mom recognized his handwriting and was clearly angry at her son for being a bully, so she gave some lamingtons and a soda, and told me I could go play video games by myself until my mom picked me up. That was the day I discovered that none of my classmates were my friends. Story 5. When I was 16, I was on my way to take my SAT on a Saturday morning. I pulled up to a four-way stop on a quiet street and looked in both directions. Glanced to my right and saw a car way down the road, didn't look for more than a second and thought I was good, since he had to stop at his stop sign. I enter the intersection and look to my right again, and the car is already at the intersection. He was going 55 miles per hour on a 25 miles per hour road. He was not stopping. Time slowed down as I realized, oh, he's about to T-bone the side of my tiny pickup truck. So I look away from the window to keep my face safe from any potential flying shards of glass. I white-knuckle grip the wheel and just hope for the best. He flipped my truck. I rolled onto my side and nailed a telephone pole with the top of my truck. As I'm laying there on my side, I'm feeling all over my body, just expecting to be badly hurt and just in shock. But amazingly, my worst injury is a scraped elbow. This was nearly 10 years ago, and even today I drive like a grandma when it comes to intersections. I'll wait an extra few seconds every time if I feel like a car is approaching too quickly. There have been times where a car is coming up quickly and my heart rate will skyrocket because I think I'm about to get hit again. I have never trusted another driver ever since that day, and being that defensive has never steered me wrong. On the bright side, the guy who hit me immediately called the police, then shoved his shirt through a crack in my door so I could cover myself while the cop broke the window and pulled me out. He broke several bones, admitted fault to the police the second they got there, and personally apologized to my hysterical mother multiple times. As shitty as I was that he hit me, at least he wasn't a person. I still took my SAT too. My hand was shaking from adrenaline the entire time. Story 6. My father was in hospice dying from cancer. He had stopped eating and was barely communicative. We knew it was just a matter of days. Mom and I went to visit him every day for a few hours so he wouldn't be alone. One morning we got a call. Fearing the worst, I answered it, expecting them to let us know he had passed. My father was on the phone and he sounded good. He even said he was hungry and asked for breakfast. He told me he was looking forward to our visit. I was stunned. Had all these emotions and thoughts. Maybe it was a miracle and he was going to beat this. Hopped in the car and started driving over. Got another phone call. This time it was the hospice folks. He had just passed. The roller coaster of emotions from that morning haunts me. I was numb for a long time. There was a period where I thought maybe I hallucinated and never spoke with my dad that morning. To put my mind at ease, I met with the hospice nurse who was with my dad that morning. She explained this concept called terminal lucidity. She says it's not uncommon at all and is usually a sign that someone will pass soon. That helped, but it still haunts me. Story 7. There was a girl next door to my grandparents' house that I had the biggest crush on. Her name was Becca. We had known each other from the time I was really little. We were both coming into the ages of liking the opposite sex at the same time, and we had similar troubled childhoods. Somewhere after holding hands, but before a first kiss, Becca gave me a ring. She borrowed it from her grandpa and needed it back the next day. I was on cloud 9. With excitement, I showed my mom the ring. She asked my grandparents to borrow their truck and told me to get in and make sure I brought the ring. I had no idea what was going on. We pulled up to the jewelry store at Eureka and Telegraph, and she asked to see the ring. She went inside and came out about 20 minutes later. Then, we went to McDonald's, the first time I'd eaten anything but food pantry food in at least a year. She said the jewelry store needed to borrow that specific ring for a few weeks to clean it up. I asked what I was supposed to tell Becca had happened to it, and she said to tell her that I had lost it. I never saw the ring again, and Becca never talked to me again. Story 8. When I was 16, I hadn't heard from my dad in longer than usual and couldn't get a hold of him. Out of the blue, my uncle shows up telling my mom that my dad has had a stroke, was in a coma. And since technically she's the closest next of kin they were divorced, she needs to talk to my sister and me about making choices. Uncle was an old-school Vietnam vet, so his weird and distant demeanor wasn't immediately raising red flags. Then my dad's former roommate and friend showed up hours later with similar but slightly different details, creepily hit on my mom, and started aggressively lecturing me about doing right by my dad and letting him go peacefully. Everything was full-blown chaos and very strange. Finally got to the hospital to see my dad, and he looked like he fell down in a mosh pit and stayed there for hours. Covered in bruises and cuts, fully intubated, swollen in parts of his head and face, just the works. Plus, it turns out he'd been there a f***ing week, and no one told us. Meanwhile, my uncle and aunts knew. When I started asking questions about his condition and such, I was told he fell down the stairs after he had a stroke, called 911 and lost consciousness, except no one had his phone. My sister and I went to his house and managed to get in, and it was awful. There were blood streaks and splatters all up and down the staircase, and at the bottom, human waste where I'm guessing my dad was laying while or after getting beat, and footprints all over that were not his. The cops were completely uninterested in treating it like a crime scene or even taking statements. Such useless cops, shocking I know. Long story short, after 3 months in a coma and almost a year of rehab, my dad is mostly functional and independent. He says he only remembers bits and pieces and none of them make sense. His former roommate never showed face again, my uncle never explained the delay in telling us, and my dad's phone never turned up. While my dad was still in a coma, our house got broken into and absolutely ransacked, and there were some weird incidents with cars parked near our house or driving by a lot. We lived in a shitty neighborhood, so it might be unrelated, but it felt different. What f***ed me up most, though, on top of the awful scene at my dad's place, was the secrecy and sudden urgency that everyone had pushing to take him off life support. I've never been able to trust or look at my family the same. Story 9. I was a search and rescue K-9 handler for nearly 20 years. One of the last searches I participated in was for a 13-year-old girl who was dropped off by her school bus at the end of her family's a half-mile-long driveway, but never made it to the house. My K-9 picked up a strong trail near the bus stop, and we followed it to the very pretty spot in the woods overlooking a quarry where the young lady had hung herself. She hadn't made it home at all that day, meaning she had either stashed the rope at the quarry or brought it to school with her. It was clearly a planned thing. This was more than 6 years ago, but I can close my eyes right now and see her shoes, neatly removed and placed at the quarry's edge with her neatly folded sweatshirt alongside like it just happened. I sometimes still dream I'm running that trail. I have a little girl who's there now, and thinking about that day scares the out of me. Story 10. I lost a friend to suicide in autumn 2017. He was the first person I loved, and he was also the first and only person to properly break my heart, which happened some years before he died. His mental health was always chaotic, and in the months before his death, I distanced myself because I was finding it overwhelming, something I regret now but also understand I needed to do. I never wanted to not be his friend. I always saw a future with us in a place where we'd be old friends who could joke about him breaking my heart when I was 20. Our friendship never recovered to what it was without the messy love thing, but it was getting there. Since his death, I have realized how much he influenced me to be the person I am today. I really miss him. I understand and accept his death. However, even now this life without him feels off balance, like something went wrong with the universe. I had so much faith in him getting better. Story 12. A couple of things compounded. When I was about 12, my father set himself on fire because he was in extreme pain and depression, and my aunt didn't bring his medication back fast enough. I wasn't there when it happened, but the emotions hit hard. Treatment for HIV was just becoming available, but too little too late in his case, and no money to afford it. Then freshman year of college, my grandfather died due to a drawn-out mistreatment at the hospital that should have amounted to malpractice, and I was too poor to get home to attend his funeral, let alone help. Then that same year, my stepfather hung himself with razor wire and was decapitated. Again, wasn't there when it happened. He had tried to cut his head off before and showed up to our house with stitches across his neck like Frankenstein, so I guess the signs were there. I think the powerlessness in these circumstances, coupled with imagery, is what haunts me. 18 years later, I now manage a large organization, white-collar colleagues, and have no one to talk to about it or who could relate to my past. Regardless of income or privilege, I will always feel like an outsider in my social and personal relationships. Story 12. My dad died after a fairly short bout with brain cancer. He was one of the healthiest human beings ever. He was 60, never smoked, never drank, worked out every day. Literally, he had six-pack abs and looked like he was maybe in his early 40s. Then suddenly out of nowhere he gets brain cancer and slowly shriveled away over 5 months. I was only 26 when it happened. I remember something I was told by one of his friends at the funeral. He said that it never gets easier, you just get used to it. I thought that was a rather callous and inconsiderate thing to say, but now about 8 years later, it remains true. Story 13. At the age of 15, I had 2 metal rods and 14 steel screws surgically attached to my spine. It was a 12-level spinal fusion, which is easily the most painful experience of my life, especially considering one of the 5 IVs I had was folded over, so I didn't get morphine for the first 24 hours. At 21, I was working at a hospital when a patient began sliding off a bed. She weighed around 400 pounds and had 1 leg and was useless to help herself. On instinct, I dove in to catch her upper body. 1 steel rod and 1 screw snapped, along with the fusion, which is now solid bone tissue. The breaks happened on 2 separate levels and left 2 sharp metal ends stabbing the tissues around my spine. The workman's comp doctor never looked at the x-rays, and it was 2 full years before we discovered what happened. After 3 trips to the ER, the injury and resulting surgery left me with permanent damage, and I lost 80% of my work functions, meaning 80% of what I could do on the job. I couldn't anymore. That was 14 years ago. I'll always walk with a limp. I'll never do 95% of the things I really want to do. Since COVID kicked my ass, it's difficult just to move boxes or mow the lawn at home, let alone find a full-time job. So, that would be my answer. And for those in the medical field, anything over 50 pounds simply isn't worth it. You could spend the next 80 years a crippled, depressed mess with more medical debt than you can keep track of. Story 14. When I was in kindergarten, my mom thought it was pajama day and sent me to school in pajamas. It was not pajama day, it was picture day. So in my picture with my classmates, everyone is dressed all nice and I'm wearing pajamas. To this day, when there is something like a costume party or casual day at work, I will literally check that it's the right day every hour before going in, asking multiple people to clarify and still bring a change of clothes in case every single time I check the date I read it wrong or the universe suddenly skips a day. Story 15. My 3rd grade teacher told me how her husband went deaf in 1 ear. I still sleep with a blanket over my ear because of it. He was graduating college, and when he was in his dorm with his roommates, he had started cleaning his ear with a Q-tip. His buddy, I guess, pushed the door open with such force to surprise him or celebrate their graduation that when the door hit him, it jammed the Q-tip in his ear and he lost his hearing. Still makes me cringe to think about, and since then I always need something covering my ear when I go to sleep. Not sure why I thought it would help, but now I can't not do it. Story 16. My grandfather sexually assaulted me when I was a teenager. Took me 10 years to tell my family. They knew something had happened, but I never told them details. He angrily denied it to my parents. Grandmother, who I was incredibly close with, called me a liar, said he would never do that, despite the fact that she was there when it happened. She was napping on the couch a few feet away. No one understands how much this f***s a person up until it happens. Haven't spoken to them since. I think about it every single day. I am no longer invited to any family get-togethers. My parents say they believe me but still attend for my grandmother's sake. It is ridiculously painful. Story 17. There was this place on the river where a small bridge created a miniature pool. It was a paradise. One day, we saw firefighter fast boats and an ambulance rushing along the river. They made us evacuate. Turns out a 17-year-old boy jumped from a car bridge just 1 kilometer back and into the river as a challenge. While he was struggling to get out, a 14-year-old girl saw him and tried to save him but got stuck as well. Fortunately, a local canoeist was around, and he rushed towards the two. He only managed to save the girl. It was too late for the boy. A couple minutes later, while my dad was trying to get the car out of there, a helicopter came over and pulled the body up. I remember seeing the face of the paramedics when they realized. His mom arrived and she couldn't tell what was going on since she was Arabic and didn't speak our language. Her face became bone white when a local managed to translate the only two words a mom would never want to hear: "He's dead." It was hard to not remember what had happened when coming back a week later.